You know, it's not my favorite thing to do. Let's try it this way. It's those lanes back there, ain't it? It's always the lanes. Causing trouble. Always causing trouble. Helen Lane. It's all right. We've come to expect it, Miss Helen. We've come to expect it. I can't imagine anybody that causes less trouble than Helen Lane. But that's probably why it's fun. I mean, John, you might want to keep quiet. Don't even do it. We're going to look at 2 Corinthians. We're going to finish chapter 11 today, picking up at verse 16. 2 Corinthians 11. And we're going to start in verse 16. And I hope this to me was an unusual little bit of Scripture. I guess I say that every single time because Paul's always challenged me in some kind of new way. But it was kind of enjoyable to look through this. So what I want to do is I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to have some conversation, hopefully, and look at what he's doing here. So 2 Corinthians chapter 11, starting in verse 16. I repeat, let no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool, so that I too may boast a little. What I'm saying, I say not with the Lord's authority, but as a fool, in this boastful confidence. Since many boast of worldly things, I too will boast. For you gladly bear with fools, being wise yourselves. For you bear it if a man makes slaves of you, or preys upon you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or strikes you in the face. To my shame, I must say, we were too weak for that. But whatever anyone dares to boast of, I am speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast of that. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I am talking like a madman, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, and often near death. 5 times I have received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I have been beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I have been shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been adrift at sea. On frequent journeys in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brethren, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there is the daily pressure upon me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak? And I am not weak? Who is made to fall? And I am not indignant? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, He who is blessed forever, knows that I do not lie. At Damascus, the governor under King Aretas guarded the city of Damascus in order to seize me. But I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands. All right, there's our interesting text for today. I want to start, though, by thinking and asking, just simple definition, what does it mean to you to boast? What is being boastful? We tend to recognize it, don't we? We recognize it when we hear it? Yes, sir?
A waste of effort.
A waste of effort, okay? Okay, yeah, well, could be, I guess. What do you think? What's boasting?
Particularly about your own accomplishments.
Yeah, it's talking a lot about your own accomplishments. What is our usual intention when we want to boast? What are we trying to do?
Impress others.
To impress others, yeah, to maybe convince others.
Make someone see something that's very valuable or important.
Okay, yeah, we can inflate the value of something and try to convince people of doing that way. That's true. Would you say in our society at large that boasting is something that is agreeable? Is that something that we can do? Is it expected? What do we think? Or is it like one of those things like, oh, that's sort of repellent? What do you think? Society, okay?
It depends.
Depends, okay.
And it's funny how somebody talks about how if you boast in yourself, you're wasting your effort. Really? There's an old proverb that says, he who tooteth not his own horn shall have his own horn untooted.
Okay.
And some people feel like they have to do that to get attention for what they're doing.
Sometimes you like if you want to get some credit. Okay, so I think about like with a resume. You send in a resume, right? What is a resume in a sense? You're touting all the things that you've done, right?
It's a formalized, business accepted brag about myself.
Brag about myself. This is what my...
Because to be honest, Mark, and I didn't know that particular proverb, but if I don't, in the business setting, it is the rare exception where if I don't brag about my accomplishment or our own accomplishments, no one else will.
Yeah.
And I've seen this a lot where the loud or person, braggart, gets more attention and sometimes other benefits, whereas the humble servant, the humble who's actually doing the work, doesn't always get the benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I think that
It's a poor supervisor that allows going on what he's talking about.
Okay. Watch out, supervisors all over the place. You're getting some scrutiny over here. Yeah. Yeah. I think about it like where it's completely acceptable, right, is in politicians. This is what they do, right? This is what they do. Mayor Kelly will send out an email to us, and it'll be like, I reduced homelessness by a third. I'm like, really? You know, they'll take a statistic, right? No, this is nothing against you, Mayor. They'll take a statistic and then they'll take it and try to take credit from it, right? I've been able to do this and this and this, and so it is sort of accepted there. Now let me throw this scenario out. It's interesting because this week I was talking to a coworker who has a really good friend. They're both 46 years old, divorcees, graduates of Howard High School, 1994, I think it is. And she was telling me like they're on the dating scene, right? And that's a rough place to be, I think, in this day and age. And so her friend got inboxed by this graduate who'd moved out to Vegas. So they're on the phone, and the guy he's dropped his accent completely. He's talking about how are things in Chattanooga, right? He's gone real elevated, and then he starts to talk about how he retired at 26. He's got a thriving music business. He's been dating all these celebrities. He's just going on and on about how great his life is, how good he is. And her friend's like, well, you'll never guess where I work. He said, do you work in the office? And he mentioned do you work in a bank? Do you work in the office? She lets him go and she says, no. She said, I work at Crystal. He said, the burger place? Right? She caught that boasting, right? And that was repellent. She does work at Crystal, but she also has a separate side job. And I'm not saying anything about Crystal because that's a legitimate thing, right? I'm not saying that at all. That's not the sort of thing that you typically boast about, right? We don't typically do that. And so it can be somewhat repellent. And this is kind of the thing that Paul's doing here. What do we know? What do we know about the Corinthians, right? We remember in the first letter, there was an issue about, they divided into factions about who's following which speaker. And then there's a disdain about manual labor. Of course, Paul's doing manual labor, right? There's a disdain about, whether whether you can articulate how great you're speaking. He's just not up to par here. He's just not that good. He's not cultured enough, maybe. Their world is one where they had a lot of boasting, but it was still repellent to a lot of people in the audience sometimes. And I think that's why one reason Paul is going to go to the point and say, I was a madman, I'm a fool, I'm speaking like an idiot, right? Because sometimes you could boast if you were defending yourself. That's how that worked. We see it in chapter 6. Go back to chapter 6 real quick. Chapter 6, he's in defense of himself. And what he says in chapter 6, verses 3, he said, we're putting no obstacle in anybody's way. He's talking about the apostles here. But as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way through great endurance in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger, by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love. So he goes through all these things, right? So he's in the defense of himself. So that was mostly okay. But when you're a Corinthian, then you might boast about which position you were appointed to by the governor. If you're a patron, like a big donor, right? Because that's how it worked. You had a patron, and they funded your things, and so you say, oh, well, I had this building named after me. This statue is named to me, and so you build your credibility. It's a kind of resume, right, of how you should be. So I think this is one of the places where we're not that far off from the Corinthians. We do the same thing. I've never had a building named after me. I never will. I'm pretty sure of that, right? But I guess if I did, then that would be something I'd be happy about. I remember one time there was a guy who had a road named after him at DuPont. And he took me one time, he said, you got to see my road. And so we went and we looked at the road, and it looked to me like just a road. You know, it was just a short little road going into DuPont. It wasn't anything I thought particularly impressive as a 16-year-old. But whatever. He was really proud of it. He was boasting about it, right? So I don't think we're too far off. That's my guess. Now, Paul is trying to thread a needle here, right? He's making a point rhetorically. Does anybody remember Proverbs 26, 4 through 6? If somebody could read Proverbs 26, 4 through 6, that would be excellent.
Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Okay, so thanks a lot there, Proverbs. No way that's going to be confusing. So you've got this narrow little window, right? And this is, I guess, where wisdom comes in, is how do you discern that? Don't answer a fool according to his folly, but then answer him according to his folly, right? So this is what Paul is aiming to do. He's trying to show them the fools, right, without becoming one himself. And he's going to do it by setting up a parody. He's going to boast about things you just don't boast about. And that's how he's going to. Let's see how he does. Let's look here. We'll kind of break it down. All right. So, I repeat, let no one think me foolish. They already do think he's foolish, don't they? They already think that he's kind of lost. He's a lost ball in high weeds. He's just not up to par. But even if you do accept me as a fool, so that I may boast a little. What I'm saying, I say not with the Lord's authority, but as a fool. So he's setting it up. Like, don't think I'm being serious about this. Okay? Don't think I'm being serious about that. Since many boast of worldly things, I too will boast. Okay. You've pushed me into... Have you ever been in a situation... maybe somebody's wanting to pick a fight with you or an argument, and they keep pushing you, I'm going to take the high road. I am not going to get in the mud with them. And then finally you say, okay, you want to go there? We're going to go there, right? That's the way I kind of envision this. Like he says, okay, you want to play the boast game. You've pushed me into it. Okay, this is a waste of time. This is sort of a waste of time. But we're going to do it. And then he's going to flip it on his head, isn't he? Look down here, and he's going to say in verse 21, right? But whatever one dares to boast of, I'm speaking as a fool. So here again, they've assigned me as a fool. These people have already
labeled me this way. They've said, I'm not up to snuff. Okay, here we go. I'm going to play the role. Right? He's doing a lot of things here. So he's going to create a parody. He's going to make a mockery of self-boasting. That's what I think he's doing here. All right, so let's look at what he's boasting of. Are they Hebrews? Now, there was a thing, like this is in the diaspora, right? So you have Jews that have been spread out all over the place, and it mattered what your relation to the homeland was. What's your relationship to Jerusalem? Jerusalem was the focal point of everything historically, wasn't it? That was Zion. That was the big thing. And so you've been spread out. Good old Nebuchadnezzar, he spread you all out. And now you've got this connection. So he says, so am I, right? Okay, that's the one thing everybody's boasting about. You can boast about that. Israelites, so am I. Descendants of Abraham, so am I. And then are they servants of Christ? Now, let's talk about that. Does anybody today boast about how great a servant of Christ they are? What do you think? Nobody. David's like, nope, it doesn't happen anywhere today. There are no megachurch pastors that have overswelled egos. Sorry, megachurch pastors. I don't mean that in any way. It can happen, right? But if you were going to boast, what sorts of things would you boast about? I've memorized the entire Bible. I know I've written 18 commentaries on all these books. Look, here's my degrees, right? The congregation I preach at, it's got 6,000. We got 8 campuses and 6,000 members and a budget of this, and I've got my own jet. You guys seen the TV evangelists that get called out because they got their own jets, the private jets, and then they're trying to explain why they have a private jet. Nobody else get that in the news feed? Maybe it's just me. I don't know. Probably is. It's always interesting because it's a little bit of a delicate situation. And maybe Greg needs a jet. I don't know. He's going to El Salvador soon. Let's just go ahead and save some money on that plane ticket. Get him a private jet, right?
Maybe not, Mark. Maybe not.
Maybe not? Oh, well, sorry. Bob, any room for that in the budget? No comments. All right. It would be something to boast about, wouldn't it? Yeah. I think I mentioned there's a church. Well, I'm not going to do that. Okay. So that's the sort of thing that we would boast about, right? How many books we've published, how big our podcast is, our audience, these kinds of things. We would say that's something that makes me more righteous, right? Then even that he's going to turn on his head, isn't he? Those are the things the world would want us to do. Whether I write a best-selling novel, mystery novel, because that's what I want to write one day, or I write my best-selling mystery novel, would be really proud of that accomplishment. If I write a best-selling commentary, do people buy commentaries? I guess they do, of the book of Corinthians, right? Then it's the same kind of thing, it's just in a different genre. He's going to take all the things that the world boasts and values about, and he's going to turn them upside down. He's going to turn them upside down because that's what Jesus does. Jesus turns them upside down. And so that's what he's going to do. Okay. I keep saying the same thing. I'm talking like a madman. Okay. So with far greater labors, what's the kind of like the first thing that the Corinthians had against this man? He does labor. Right? He's doing physical labor. So where does he start his parody? With the very thing that they hit him first. I think that's wonderful. Oh, good job, Paul. He's a tent maker. Like, oh my goodness. You know, so that's where he's going to start. Far more imprisonments. Yeah. I don't think we really boast whether we've been in prison. Probably not. I don't think we boast that we haven't been to prison. If you can boast in your friend group that you haven't been to prison, you're probably in a bad friend group. I'm just saying, I don't want to be too judgmental, but if you're the only one in your friend group that hasn't gone to prison, you probably ought to look for some new friends. Yes, sir.
I remember about 20 years ago, the church of, should we hire this guy or not?
Yeah.
As the new preacher. And at the end, he's like, okay, this is the resume. Any takers here? And like, no, nobody wanted it. It's like, man, like, this is Paul resume. Because looking at his resume of what he's accomplished, what he's been through, I can guarantee just about no church would actually want him as a preacher.
That's kind of the irony, isn't it? We'll read his stuff all day, but then we wouldn't actually want to hire him.
He did write several books.
He did. That he did.
But I mean, honestly, do we feel like, okay, he's been in prison, check. That's definitely a plus for a preacher, right? He's been in
Yeah.
prison,
Incited some riots.
and,
Definitely what you want.
constantly in danger, constantly causing problems in cities.
Yeah.
We want that, right?
That's definitely. Yeah, troublemaker, everywhere he goes. There's like mayhem and things that follow in his wake. That's what we want. Yeah, it probably is a special case. I'm not suggesting that if you are in a HR position that you find the people who've been incarcerated the most and hire them. I think there's probably some nuance that needs to be added to that. But at the same time, it is an unusual thing to boast of, right? And that's his point. Countless beatings. We tend to value people who don't get beat up, don't we? Like the champions, what's it called where they get in the octagon? What's that called? Somebody in here watches that. I hadn't seen it in a bunch of years. So the fighting champions, is it AF something? Anyone. UFC.
And now I'm embarrassed. No, I don't watch that. I just.
Well, no, I'm sure, David, we are not judging you about that. There's no judgment in the church. Definitely not. Yeah. Not boasting about how many hours you've spent watching people beat each other up. But the whole point of that, right, is that you win a lot of matches, and it's a pretty brutal thing to watch if you haven't watched it. We watched it when I was younger. I liked it because you got different disciplines. I remember my favorite was the sumo wrestler. A sumo wrestler was taking on like this kickboxer. And sumo wrestling, who wouldn't be interested in that a little bit? So anyway, there's confession. I always end up confessing too much. Right, but you don't. The people who get beat aren't the ones who you put on the pedestal, right? Unless you're a really die-hard sports fan, if your team always loses, you're usually not like, oh yeah, our team's the best, you know. Well, probably in that you do. Often near death. Okay, that's a pretty rough place to be. 5 times I've received at the hand of Jews the 40 lashes less 1. So what I found out about this is there were a couple options if you were a Jew and that continually fell, that had problems. One is that they could expel you, right? They could expel you. And the other is they will beat you if you don't, so they want you to renounce your identity with the group. Like you've caused so much trouble, they want you to say, well, I'm not connected to them anymore. I'm just on my own. Like they're kicking you out of the party, right? You're not part of the group anymore. And so sometimes they would try to encourage that by the 40 lashes less 1, right? And it was a little different. They had the leather whips, right? So this is somebody who does math can probably find out how many lashes he's actually had 5 times and 39, I guess. Yeah. Cut your ties with the Jewish community or take the lashes. And he took the lashes on 5 different occasions. All right. 3 times I've been beaten with rods, which is interesting because it was illegal to beat Roman citizens with rods. I'm glad that punishments that are illegal never happen today, right? I'm glad that it obviously did happen, and it didn't make a big difference. He should not have been beaten with rods, but on 3 occasions he was. Once I was stoned, and not in the modern sense of the word. He got rocks pelted at him. That's usually what you do when you're going to kill somebody back in the day, right? You'd stone them. And once I was stoned, and he lived to tell the tale. 3 times I've been shipwrecked. Let's talk about shipwrecks. Let's talk about actually, because a night and a day have been adrift at sea. So there are a couple things I wanted to think about this. I dug in, I started contemplating it. All right, Justin just got a new boat, right? He wanted to take it out yesterday. And one of the things that was on my mind was like, okay, so you're going to take it out by yourself, and do you have a life vest? Probably one of the number one things I want to know, right? So what would it have been like to go out onto the ocean with no lifeboat, no life vest, no flares, none of that? It's just you and the water. Would you sign up for a cruise? No. Never again. Shipwrecks were relatively common in that area because, I mean, it's a tough place to be. That's a harsh environment. One might go so far as to say that the ocean is an environment that maybe is not really ideal for humans to be in. Imagine that. What happens if the only way you navigate is by stars? All right? And then it's cloudy and you can't see those stars. Anybody signing up for this cruise yet? Say, book my ticket with Carnival. I'll take my chances with the norovirus or whatever it is that you get at the cruise ship. Right? Book my ticket. I'm not going on Paul's cruise. Now, I want to add in a different layer that I've discovered about the ancient world. Oceans, especially, were considered to be very haunted places. Very haunted because when you die at sea, you can't have a proper burial. And your spirit can't find its way to the Hadean realm. Now, I don't know if Paul believed that, but a lot of people did. So now, let's put it all together. You're getting in this boat with no lifeboat, no life preservers, no flares, no sense of being able to find your way or your location on the sea, and you're going into a sea that's full of ghosts trying to find their way to the Hadean realm. Not really what you want to do, is it? But Paul is saying, this is what I've done. How many shipwrecks? 3 shipwrecks. I haven't been in one shipwreck. I hadn't managed to not even turn over my canoe when I got in it. Yeah, see me boasting? All right? So I think there's something to think about with that. Take it for what it is. On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers. Okay? What do we do with our rivers now if they tend to swell and flood a lot? What do we do? We dam them up, control them. The old TVA, right? Change Chattanooga forever. Change the whole valley. I mean, that's what we've done. Not happening, right? Those rivers can swell and flood and become torrents in no time at all. Danger from robbers, right? Most people in this time did not travel once it got dark. They found a place to stay because while Rome was really working on keeping their roads safe, it's not a guaranteed thing. How many of us really worry about, if we're taking a trip, how many of us really worry about coming into the hands of robbers? Well, I mean, I don't. I mean, minimally, probably. I don't really think about it. Now, it's nothing for a lot of people to pull an all-night drive and go along, you know. Not the case. So he's traveled a lot more than most people in the ancient world did. He's worried about robbers. I wonder if he ever encountered any. Danger from his own people. Most people in the ancient world that were reputable, when they traveled, they had a security detail. They had some people come with them, if you're reputable. Paul's running around, he's got robbers and he's dangerous from his own people, right? Danger from Gentiles. We know how that worked out for him a lot of the time. Danger in the city. Danger in the wilderness. I like the way he starts with danger, danger, danger every time. Right? It's creating almost a rhythm. Boom. He's really driving it home. How many times has he faced this? And most of us, again, if you talk about a traditional boasting, we might boast about living in a gated community. It's safe. We have a low crime rate. Nothing unexpected or untoward ever happens in our community, right? But that's not what he's going for, because he's doing a parody. He's mocking the whole thing of it. Again, in toil and hardship. So, ministry concerns, right? He's got a lot of ministry concerns, doesn't he? It's sort of a good thing, because we have a lot longer of a New Testament, right? Because he's dealing with those ministry concerns. And you can see in the flavor of his writing how much it bears on him. It's anguish he's writing with. That's enough to make a lot of us check out. We're like, okay, that's it for me. Somebody else, good luck with that. Labor again, he's hitting again. That's one of the things that he's been ridiculed for. Through sleepless nights and hunger and thirst. That's probably one of the things too. So sleepless nights could be cold. He talks about in cold and exposure. Now your version may say nakedness, and what I saw with the word could be either poorly clothed or completely naked, and then being Paul could have been either way, I suppose. Hunger and thirst is not something that I think too much about. I mean, I worry immensely about getting hungry, more than I should, and I'm always thinking about the next meal. I think I've confessed that before. I've already thought a lot about what we're doing for lunch today, because that's the way I am. And so when you don't have those options, and food isn't very easy to come by, right? You can't just go get a loaf of bread. You gotta make the flour, and then you gotta do the whole 9 yards. Like it's a lot. And hunger and thirst. Thirst in their area too, right? It's not always that easy to get drink water in desert areas. So that's something to think about. Cold and exposure, we talked about that. And apart from other things, there's the daily pressure upon me of my anxiety from all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to fall, and I am not indignant? Boasting of weakness in a status-filled culture is unusual, to say the least. He's taking it and he's making it, he's turning it upside down. Now, the last verses here are some things that I got most excited about this, partly because it's the sort of thing that excites me a lot. It always struck me as a little strange that he's ending this whole thing talking about getting let down in a basket. That's sort of strange. I mean, like, in all the things that he's got going on, I would be happy to get in a basket and get let out, right? So what we dug into, when I dug into this, there was something, okay, let me start from the beginning. Most cities had walls, didn't they? And they did a lot of warring with each other. Have you noticed that? Groups going to try to take over a city or conquest, and it was the age of empires. You had so many different empires going along. Rome was doing a lot, but they had their rival empires and everything. And so how did you take a city with walls? You had to besiege it, didn't you? You set up around and you try to starve them out. That's what ended up happening in Jerusalem in 70, right? Everybody started to starve to death first. And then you try to cut off their water and things like that. But a lot of times the cities had gardens within the walls, and they had wells within the walls. And so it could take a really long time. Eventually, what you had to do was get the ladders. Do I have any Lord of the Rings fans? Right? You got they're taking Helm's Deep, right? And they got those big old ladders. So that's what you ended up having to do. You had to get the ladders when you're making your assault. Now, who in here wants to be the first one up that ladder? Right? What's likely to happen to you when you go up that ladder? Well, they're going to be ready for you. They're going to dump oil, hot things that you'd want to avoid. You don't want to take a bath in these things, right? And then let's say you dodge the burning oil and you get to the top. Who's waiting at the top? The whole army, right? Angry men who are revved up and they're not even tired from fighting yet, right? So there was a special award that you would get. It was called Corona Morales. It was a crown that they would give for the first person who went up over the ladders. Now the crown was made of metal and it looked like kind of ramparts. It had like the little notches in it. Okay, it was a highly esteemed thing to get that. Right, you showed exorbitant bravery and courage and loyalty and patriotism. Right, you did your thing. Now what happened, because it was highly valued, is that a lot of people would claim to have been the first person over the wall, but they weren't. So and most people don't live to tell it, right? So their families might claim this, or their comrades. So what you had to do was you had to go and give an oath before the gods to keep you honest. You swore an oath to the gods that you really were the first person over the walls. And then you could get your Corona Morales, your crown of the wall. Now look what Paul's doing here. Look what he's doing. 31. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, who is blessed forever, knows that I do not lie. What's he doing? He's making his oath before his God. And then, is he bragging about being the first one over the wall to conquer? No. He's saying, I escaped in a basket. He has completely turned it upside down. The last thing anybody values is the person who runs away. Right? And he's saying, let me boast. I got in a basket, I hid, and I escaped. He's wanting to trade the Corona Morales for a Corona Christi. Right? Who died? Which king died outside the walls of the city? Christ. Which king was crowned with a crown of thorns? Which king was beaten? Which king was completely despised? Which king had it all and gave it all up to serve? To die for people who did not even want him. Paul is taking this moment of parody, of sarcasm, and he's revealing the true nature of the Christ we serve. Isn't he? He's taking it and he's showing in a mockery how if you follow the way of boasting in the world, what you're left with is the same as what the world has. It's the same. Christ turns everything upside down. Eye for an eye? I say no. He turns everything upside down. Hate your enemy? I say no. And I think what Paul does quite brilliantly is he takes all of those things and he shows, while mocking, which is just remarkable that you're able to make such a poignant point through mockery, and he's still being accurate with the things that he did. It's mind-blowing to me. Yes, ma'am.
And this is a great chapter, like I said, because you see Paul's ability to set forth his case. You know, remember in Galatians he says, have I been under enemy because I tell you the truth? And he's telling them the truth. And in order to do so in our lives, sometimes you have to set forth your case.
Yeah.
And you know, in this chapter they call him untrained in speech. Well, some translators messed that up because he was probably next to Jesus, the greatest orator that ever walked the face of the earth. He went before King Agrippa, Bernice, he went before Festus, he went to the area of Areopagus and taught, went to Jerusalem, calmed the mob in the temples. He was God's hand. And so I think we have to be so careful, because a lot of people go, well, Paul wasn't trained in speech. Not in the Greek sense. He never spoke in the Greek sense.
Yeah.
Because he did not like the way the Greeks set everything up in an outline. He was a Jew. He spoke for God.
It's I don't know what his speech was like. His writing is certainly it's up there with any of the renowned philosophers or writers of the ancient world. Like it is right up there in complexity and skill and everything else. I wish I could know what his opponents thought when they read this letter. I like, how did that land for them? Like, I want to know. Greg.
I was going to say, one of the things you see here, he's actually mocking himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's not even mocking his opponents. He's putting himself in that position, and he's doing exactly what he said he did in 1 Corinthians. We determine of nothing among you but Jesus Christ and Him crucified.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't focus on the power of the resurrection so much as he focused on the crucifixion.
It's a big deal.
That's the real way of glory, is through the humility of the cross.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing that Jesus wanted himself. And it's the last thing we want, for honest. Paul didn't want to go through all this stuff. It wasn't his pleasure and joy to go through these things. It was his duty. And it was his... And when he kept... Those guys who are his opponents are not doing that.
No.
And so what he's really doing is he's saying, here's what I am. It looks a whole lot more like Jesus than those guys who are proud of themselves.
I think it's interesting because one of the things historically that's interesting about... I see you, Ernie. Let me just get this off my chest real quick, because you said something that makes it... Like, there's not a lot of ancient documents. There's not a lot of ancient documents that talk about crucifixion. The Gospels are some of the primary things to talk about it. And that's because it was so disgraceful, it was so distasteful, that nobody even wanted to mention it. It was 300 or 400 years before anybody even depicted it. Now, we live in a time now where it's not. We got our own cross right here, but it's completely unfathomable without Jesus and without Paul. Yes, Ernie. Okay.
I was going to say boasting is usually too many personal pronouns.
Uh-huh.
I or we. Notice when you use those pronouns, Christ didn't use those. He said, follow me.
Mm-hmm.
My Father will do such and such.
Yeah.
I will give you rest. But He's able to give us rest until we do His will, and that's work. And then when He comes back, He'll give us the rest that He promised.
Yes. That's a good point.
If we can follow Him and not use the personal pronouns and use the nouns, God in Christ.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
He constantly shifts the focus, doesn't he? He constantly shifts the focus. Yes, sir.
Something Greg said, made me think of Romans 8:18. I consider the suffering of this present time are not worthy to compare to the glory of be revealed to us. I mean, we just read through a lot more Paul's gone through. And it's frankly worse than most of us have gotten it.
Yep.
Got the experience. What he's looking forward to in Christ is what he sees in Christ is so much greater.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Even as bad as all that is, what he's got is going to be so much greater. And so if I haven't even been through as much bad stuff as he has, I mean, it's just going to be unsurpassed. And I don't know that that's necessarily should be my goal, but I do try to avoid imprisonment. I do try to avoid beatings. Not a huge fan. Not a huge fan. And stoning, I hope I never have to experience that. Shipwrecks either, for that matter. Any of that list. I'll just count me out of all that. And anyway, let's end with a word of prayer. Thank you, God, for the day that you've given us and for the example we see in Paul and for the example we see in each other. Father, help us to always keep our minds focused on you. Help us, Father, to invert the values of this world, to prize those things that are unprized by our society and our culture. And dear Father, help us always to follow the way of Christ, even if it leads us outside of the walls and onto a cross. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.